just for your information, we're also broadcasting it in our page in the YouTube for live. In 20 seconds it will start, then we could begin. We have a page in the YouTube, so people could, have a look at it as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, our great pleasure to welcome you at this webinar called COVID-19 Challenge for Economic Growth, organized by the Economic Research Institute in Nur Sultan. First of all, let me send the best greetings of our chairman, Mr. Sultanov. He's sending best regards and a very fruitful webinar that will be organized today. And as I mentioned just before, we are also broadcasting it in our web page at YouTube live, and also you can have a look at it after the webinar. It's going to be saved over there. As you know, the coronavirus pandemic has wreaked havoc global economies. Stemming the tide has certainly impacted all countries around the world, even though with different magnitudes. When it comes to Kazakhstan, it has reacted promptly, launching massive emergency measures to complement national efforts. And more detailed information will be given by my colleague, Mr. Kuanish. I will properly introduce him later on. And when it comes to the agenda, let me go through the main speakers of today's event. First is Mr. Kuanish Bisingazin. He is the Director of Center of Economic Research Institute. Then Professor Claude Habitbol, he's from France. Dr. Lars Henrik from Germany, the Managing Director of DIW Econ. Mr. Peter Klepp from Belgium, Research Fellow, Property Rights Alliance, and Mr. Jean-Pierre Cordier from France. Then Mr. Paolo Sarbello from Italy. Then, if you don't mind, at the end of all the speeches, we're going to have open discussions, and if we receive some questions in our web page, and at YouTube, I'm going to raise it myself. Then whoever intends to answer the questions, please welcome, or any comments also would be welcome. Before we start, ladies and gentlemen, let me briefly introduce to you the main activities of our Economic Research Institute with the presentation. Economic Research Institute is a state-leading institution that studies problems of integrated development of Kazakhstan economy, and it has been founded in 1961. Economic Research Institute is aimed at providing scientific support for the country's economic strategy implementation, analyzing of economic state and the forecasting of its future development, promoting of sustainable economic growth, improving of the level and the quality of people's life. So as you can see at this slide, we have in main activities on human resource capacity, a number of bachelor's, master's, MSCs, and PhDs. And we also would like to note that we are on 20th place of the think tanks of the Pennsylvania University. Next slide, please. The world economy is changing dramatically, and the country's leadership must quickly adapt to the new economic realities. In this regard, there is a growing need for scientific economic research that provides a qualitative analysis of the current economic situation. To make strategic decisions and to pursue the most effective economic policy, the country's government should rely on scientific analysis of the world economy and the economic situation in Kazakhstan. Therefore, Economic Research Institute is actively involved in the development process of the most important state programs and bills, and in assessing of the country's economic situation. Particular attention is paid to the strategic and the program documents monitoring and revising, as well as to applied scientific research in the field of economics based on the use of modern economic and mathematical models. In general terms, it means that we are involved not in the scientific approach, but also we are monitoring certain processes and reporting it to the government. Next, please. These are the key priority areas of the institution. So macroeconomic analysis, we do the forecasting of social economic development of the Republic of Kazakhstan and also abroad. Having in mind the COVID-19, we're also quite closely monitoring the processes around the world. And based on that, we make the recommendations and proposals to the government for the strategic plans, where whether it has needed some amendments or not. We're also involved in the entrepreneurship development, so medium and small size companies that are working in Kazakhstan and intending to work abroad. We do the analysis for them as well. And analytical support of the regional policy. So we do the scientific work on the economies of the regions, of each regions of Kazakhstan, and make the proposals to the head of our governors and to the government. Next, please. Scientific economic evaluation, this is needed in order to have a look in more details where these programs could be developed or implemented quite effectively. Just a second. Giving or teaching, this is the monitoring and the forecasting, where the fields need to be paid attention in more details. And last but not least, this is the international cooperation. We are quite closely working with the international organizations. Let me highlight some of them, like OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. We are a member of several committees over there, for example, Investment Committee, and we do receive the recommendations that are being placed in Kazakhstan's law. Next slide is, we are also working on not just preparing or working for the government in order to prepare the proposals, but also we publish those scientific and analytical information in our journal. You can find it on our website as well. We are quite actively working in assistance for talented personnel. So when we involved in the university programs for the postgraduates. And as the Economic Institute, we are providing the platform, or if you like, the place for the people that are interested in exchanging the views or to find out certain solutions for certain issues. And in the next slide, I would like to show you our partners. So mainly, this is the state government institutions and also our international partners. If you have some, if you would have some more questions about the activities of Institute, please welcome to our website. We are prepared a new one with detailed information. Dear colleagues, let's stick to the agenda. Then my pleasure to give the floor to Mr. Kuanesh Pisingazin, who has 8 years of research experience in the field of macroeconomics. He graduated from Moscow State University, named after Lomonosov, and also he completed the Pechuni University in Italy. Measures of Kazakhstan towards national economic recovery. Mr. Pisingazin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Rick. Can we start our presentation here? Yeah, good morning and good afternoon, colleagues. I'm glad to be here in order to discuss the challenges facing countries in order to combat COVID. And as a member of the Economic Research Institute team, I would like to talk about the measures of Kazakhstan towards national economic recovery. So next slide, please. The COVID pandemic has turned the world economy upside down. Interestingly, at the beginning of this year, various economists and international organizations were talking about and forecasted the recovery from the lowest growth rates from the past financial crisis from 2008. But unfortunately, instead of it, we are facing that various countries in developed world are facing struggling against the crisis, and the global economy entered a serious recession starting from February. According to the IMF forecast, the world economy will fall by 4.9% in 2020, which will lead to which will affect the labor market, and of course will rise the unemployment rates in all over the world. We are witnessing unprecedented outflow of foreign direct investments from the developing world, decline of the world trade, and the disruption of global and regional supply chain. And according to the IMF and WHO, the crisis of this current scale happens once in 100 years. Next slide, please. The economies of Kazakhstan's main export trading partners have rapidly declined and reflecting the impact of the COVID-19. So to combat, we can see that the USA, China, EU, and Russia are showing the great decline in their growth rates. To combat the crisis, countries all over the world, and especially those countries that are using countercyclical fiscal policies, increasing their expenditures, using fiscal stimulus measures in order to protect their lives, protect their population and businesses and their economies, which will lead, of course, to the increase of budget deficit and the corresponding level of debt. So, for example, in the US, the debt is expected to rise to 30 percentage points this year, in EU for 25. And as we will see, Kazakhstan is not an exception here. So next slide, please. According to the global decline, Kazakhstan, with a tight trading and investment partnership with the main countries like Russia, our trade main countries like Russia, China, and EU, of course, high dependency in the oil market. Kazakhstan is vulnerable, very vulnerable to the COVID spillover. As a result, Kazakhstan economy fell by 5.8% in the second quarter of this year compared to the second quarter of the previous year, while in the first quarter there was a growth of 2,007%. Kazakhstan authorities swiftly introduced decisive measures of support in order to mitigate the impact of COVID. Firstly, there was closed borders, halted air travel, and there were other restrictions on travel. After that, Kazakhstan authorities introduced two lockdown measures. First was from March, which was lasted for 2 months, and second one lasted 1.5 months, starting from July. And of course, as a result of the lockdown and other economic slowdown, about 300,000 business entities suspended their activities. 1 million business entities were directly affected, especially in the service and trade sectors. And of course, 4.5 million people received social benefits due to the lockdown. Next slide, please. As we said, the COVID affected to all the sectors of the economy. Especially it was the wholesale and trade transportation because of the lockdown. As we can see in the first graph, there was the Kazakhstan economy is showing W-shaped recovery path. So the main two local minimums was in the April and in the July, where the lockdown, where in the country was in the lockdown. We can see that the mining sector is also in the negative territory because due to the Kazakhstan agreement in OPEC Plus. And due to this agreement, Kazakhstan should decline their oil production. For example, in the 2019, Kazakhstan produced more than 90 million tons, while in this year, this will drop to the 85. But at the same time, telecom sector, not surprisingly, and construction, agricultural, manufacturing sectors having great support to the economic recovery of the Kazakhstan. Next slide, please. So, as I said before, Kazakhstan authorities introduced large-scale measures of support, not only health measures, but also the measures of supporting the business and the people. We can divide these measures into 6 main blocks. For those reasons, government allocated 14.8 billion, almost $15 billion to support it, which is almost 9% of the GDP, which is compared to other developed countries, even developed countries, it's a high amount of money. So first is maintaining household economic welfare, which is mean that government gave cash transfers to the 4 and 5 million population people. They received their transfers on the realm of a minimum wage. Government also indexed the social benefit payments by 10%. Also, even if people do not contribute to the medical insurance system, they also covered for all expenses during this period, this difficult period. Government also has great support measures to the household expenses. For example, 1 million low income and socially vulnerable people and the people with disabilities receive food baskets and daily non-food essentials. Also, government has banks not to charge fines for the loans and business loans. Also, government introduced in the large-scale employment program. In order to protect businesses, the government extended the due date for all taxes paid by SMEs till the end of 2020. Some industries, for example, agro and food, in agro-food industries, the VAT was reduced till 0%. Some SMEs in the service sectors were allowed not to pay the property tax from one year from this period. Next slide, please. But also, there was a measures on improving the firm liquidity and cash flow. For example, there was a government provided a package of liquidity provision measures by scaling up off-budget provisions of subsidized credit to SMEs. There was a new affordable housing program introduced. Also, we know that Kazakhstan, with a high share of the oil in their export, is very vulnerable on the tenge exchange rate is very vulnerable when the oil prices is volatile. So in order to ensure the exchange rate stability, National Bank of Kazakhstan acted as a sole dealer for foreign currency sales via auctions. Also, for state-owned enterprises, they were asked to sell their foreign currency on the market if it's not used for the stated goals within 10 days. Also, for all state-owned enterprises, asked to direct their dividends payments to the state budget in order to ensure the stability of the budgetary system. And also in the financial sectors, for the borrowers who didn't pay their loans because of the lockdown, there was an overturn of borrowers' negative history. If they pay their debt, 50% of debt in the following 1 year. Also, there was a new licensing of microfinance activities introduced. So all those measures, next slide, please. Of course, all those measures affected the budget system of Kazakhstan and the budgetary stance. As we said, the large-scale amount of money of 9% of GDP were allocated, and more than half of it came from the Republican budget. So that's why during this crisis, in order to mitigate the negative impact of COVID, the government stated that there is a cyclical policy is needed. So that's why we can see that the sharp decline of the deficit till 2.8%. But the main part of this deficit was recovered by the receipt of transfer from the national fund. And in the structure of the budget, it increased to the 45% in the first half of this year. So next slide, please. So in conclusion, we can say that Kazakhstan economy is affecting 5 forces. 2 of them as external forces, 2 of them internal forces. So first of all, internal forces. So first, having in mind there is a high dependence on oil market, there is a high dependence having in mind 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 there is a high dependence having reached their 17 years minimum, and sometimes WTI futures even was in the negative territory. So this was affecting, and this will affect the recovery path of the economy of Kazakhstan. And the second one is that economic slump in the main trading partners of the Kazakhstan. So we can see that in China, in Russia, in Europe, in USA, there is a great slump of economic activity. But at the same time, Kazakhstan, under the OPEC Plus agreement, cuts its oil production, as I said it before. So this, of course, will lead to the economic recovery path. And at the same time, Kazakhstan economy was 14 weeks under lockdown in the March, April, May, and July and August. Of course, it's affected greatly on the service sector activities in transportation and wholesale in the other sectors of this service. So all of these forces are turning the economic activity down, but at the same time, Kazakhstan's authorities introduced the large-scale measures of support to the economy. There were two packages of anti-crisis measures, and there was a comprehensive plan for the recovery and economic growth was implemented, which make it possible to reassure the activity in the service sector where 6 million people are employed. So I think that it is for me. Thank you very much for your attention. If you have questions, I would like to answer them.
Thank you, Juanish. Very comprehensive, very detailed information you have provided to us. I believe that some of our colleagues would have some questions, but as I mentioned, if you don't mind, let us have the open discussions at the end of this webinar so we can discuss all the issues. So before I go to next speaker, let me inform you about the bilateral relationship between France and Kazakhstan. For France, Kazakhstan is the trade number one in Central Asian region, with trade turnover is around 4 billion each year. And also, I would like to underline that France has invested more than 16 billion US dollars in various sectors of economy of Kazakhstan. And also, more than 100 companies have the shares of French investments in our country. So Professor Claude Abitbol, he is graduated from PhD of Sciences from University of Paris Sorbonne, Pierre-Marie Curie. From 2007 and 2010 was appointed as scientific advisor at the French embassy in Kazakhstan. So he knows our country quite well. In charge of scientific, university, technology, cultural cooperation programs between France, Europe, and Kazakhstan in different fields. So thoughts about global economy towards recovery and best practices. Professor Claude, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Norbert. Good morning to everybody. I would say that the COVID-19 pandemic caused the most severe economic recession on record since World War II. This is how the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, expresses itself in this latest forecast for the world economy. According to almost all observers and analysts, the economic recovery will be slow, and the crisis will have lasted ever over time effect. To date, the COVID-19 pandemic has killed more than 500,000 people around the world. However, many agree to recognize the crucial role played by health workers who have taken risks in order to limit the impact of the pandemic. I would mention this. The OECD and several other institutions are considering two likely scenarios. The first scenario is based on the hypothesis of a second wave of contagion accompanied by new containment measures before the end of 2020. Global economic production is expected to fall by 7.6 this year, and unemployment rate in the OECD area to almost double to 10%. In the second scenario, where a second epidemic wave is avoided, economic activity at the global level would then decline by 6% in 2020, and the unemployment rate will be dropped from 5.4 in 2019 to 9.2. Clear numbers have just been given by our coordinator Danish in his speech. According to the leaders of the World Bank, the first priority is to face the health and economic emergency. It is essential to fight against worsening poverty and unemployment. About the case of Kazakhstan and other countries of Central Asia, we can say Central Asia is a territory of 4 million kilometers square, almost as much as the whole of the European Union. But with more than 5 times lower population density than the European Union. This contributes to explain why this virus infection appears to be relatively limited. Compliance with strict quarantine conditions helped stabilize the epidemiologic situation. Kazakhstan's ambassador Jean Galiev rightly said recently, Kazakhstan was one of the first countries to take action and follow World Health Organization recommendations to prevent the spread of the virus. These measures against the epidemic have been judged by the World Health Organization as the most effective, especially in terms of testing. The governments of the 5 Central Asian countries quickly realized together the gravity of the epidemic situation despite the uncertainty. And as the president of Kazakhstan, Dr. Kasim Jomart Tokayev indicated in his speech on the lifting of state of emergency, introduced on March 16 and extended twice, the Kazakhstanis can return to work. Social distancing and wearing a mask in public places, however, have become the norm like in so many other countries. Kazakhstan thus appears to be prepared for a second wave of epidemic in the fall along with the usual flu epidemic. In the framework, in this framework, France is playing its role with the European Union. France has always been a major player. You just mentioned Norway, the most present among European Union members, and one of the first countries to form a strategic partnership with the country of Central Asia. Kazakhstan and France have been linked since June 11, 2008 by the Strategic Partnership Treaty. The implementation of the European Union strategy and France's action in Central Asia must and can be intensified in the context of the health difficulty currently facing. So, what can be some development proposal for European Union, Kazakhstan, and Central Asia in general cooperation action? This can be mentioned as follows. First, sharing of technology in the fight against the risk of a viral pandemic, participation of the development of a reliable and durable vaccine, and extension of the screening policy. Second, adaptation and relaxation of financial and custom criteria for economic action to support the economy of countries in difficulty. Third, increase the mobility of experts able to contribute to the fight against the coronavirus, easy access to material and equipment. Four, accentuate green recovery for jobs, incomes and growth. Invest the necessary digital modernization and small and medium-sized enterprise and in infrastructure, transport and green housing, then to build a better and greener economy. All this in useful adequacy with the data of climate change and the loss of biodiversity. In fifth, we can mention the helping companies to orient themselves towards new activities, towards new form of interactivity, teleworking, e-business, e-learning, and so on. Sixth, improve also the pool intelligence, border management, and control military cooperation in the fight against terrorism. It has been unfortunately observed in acceleration of a strong terrorist activity throughout the region in this time of pandemic. Seven, last but not least, get used to living with uncertainty. That's what I can say at this moment. Thanks for your attention. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask to participate to the debate.
Thank you, Professor Abitbol. Very, fruitful information, quite detailed. We will have the open discussions. Perhaps we will come back to your speech.
Definitely not.
Thank you again. And now, as long as the bilateral cooperation between Kazakhstan and Germany is concerned, we have a trade turnover over $5 billion US each year, and 700 companies of German companies working in Kazakhstan with the shares of German investments. And for the time being, 51 projects are being implemented in Kazakhstan with German business worth 3.7 billion US dollars. So the next speaker is Dr. Lars Hendrik. He's the managing director of the DIW Econ, the consulting company of the German Institute for Economic Research in Berlin. He has more than 10 years of experience working as an international economics consultant, advising firms, governments, associations, and research institutions. Furthermore, Mr. Hendrik has a rich experience in implementing large and complex projects in Europe, CIS, ASEAN, Central Asia, Southern Africa, and the Gulf regions. And he has studied social sciences at Humboldt University Berlin, Duke University, the London School of Economics. And he has holds a PhD from the Humboldt University in Berlin. Mr. Hendrik, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much. I was asked to do a presentation on the economic outlook of Germany and the impact of the corona crisis on the German economy. For that purpose, I would like to share my screen with you.
Yes, please.
Can you see it?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So, as you already introduced me, we are the consulting firm of Germany's largest economic research institute, and I will give you a presentation of our economic forecast, which we did in September. So, these numbers may be informative for you and will reflect the economic impact of the corona challenge from different angles. Here you can see the decomposition of GDP by quarter. And we already saw in the first quarter of this year an impact of -2%, and in the second quarter of -9.7%. This is the impact on the German economy. The -6.7 in the box is the current forecast for the entire year. And in brackets, you see our previous forecast, which we did in April, which was much more pessimistic, where we forecasted a decline of -9.4%. The reason for this improvement is that we saw a very fast recovery in the second and also now in the beginning of the third quarter of in the third quarter of this year. And you can see that the growth rate will be in the third quarter 3.8%, 1.8% in the fourth quarter. And the next year we will hover around 1.5%. And in 2020, the growth rate will decline to 1% and lower by the quarterly growth rate. So that it looks like that in 2022, the German economy will recover to the pre-crisis levels as concerns GDP. If you look at the gross value added, the contributions to growth are mainly here decomposed in manufacturing and service sectors. And you can see that the impact is much larger in the service industries than in manufacturing. However, the decline in manufacturing is still significant. This is probably not surprising, as most of you know that especially service industries were affected by the lockdown, which was also in place in Germany. All leisure-related activities, but also other service sectors declined. And we will see that in the third quarter of this year, both will return to some moderate growth again, and this will hover over the next years in a manner that it will decline gradually. If we look at the demand side, then we see that we had a significant drop in consumption. This is, of course, the mirror figure to the decline in services. But Germany also experienced a significant drop in exports, which means that international supply chains were disrupted. So this is the impact of the Corona crisis in the major trading partner countries of Germany. And we also see a significant drop in investment. This is the blue part in the here. However, this will return again to some positive growth rates in the third and fourth quarter. Again, we expect that investment will increase and that net exports will recover slightly in the third quarter, but will remain insignificant in their contribution to German GDP over the next quarters until 2022. Here we see the GDP, the quarterly GDP, which is around 810 billion euros before the impact of the crisis, and you see the significant drop in the second quarter. And here you can see that in the end of first quarter of 2022, we will recover to pre-crisis levels, and we are way below the potential production level of the German economy. Here we decompose this decline into the different segments. The first is the green line is the domestic use. We see a significant drop, but the much bigger impact we see on exports and also on the import side. If you look on the demand side, then government consumption is quite stable and increasing. We see a significant drop in household consumption, and we see also a significant drop in investment. The surprising element here is that construction investment is bottoming a little bit, but remains positive and will increase again over the next quarters. So that construction is something like a stabilizing sector in the German economy. Now the impact on the labor market. This is again quarterly figures. On the left part of the slide, you see the number of employees, and in the second quarter, the number of employees in Germany declined by more than 600,000 people. And we see that the growth in employment, which we expect for the next quarters, will not compensate for this decline in employment, which we saw already in the second quarter and which continues also in the third quarter. On the right side of the slide, you see some German specialty. This is so-called short-time workers, which means that in Germany we have an institution in place that if corporate and economic active agents declare that they are short on work, they can apply for subsidies at the Federal Employment Office. And then the Federal Employment Office will compensate up to 85% of the monthly wages and of the workers in short-time work conditions. You see that about 4.7 million workers are on short-time work in the second quarter. This is mostly in the manufacturing business and mostly in the German automobile production. So this is the largest number or the largest group within this short-time workers. And you will see that with the increased economic activity over the next quarters, this number will decline significantly, but will remain positive until the end of 2022. During the recession, the government decided that the short-time work subsidies paid to the companies will be extended beyond initially it was 6 months, then it was extended to 1 year, and now it's extended to up to 2 years. So this will, therefore we will see high figures of short-time workers also in 2021. If you look at gross value added, then we see the impact, if you decompose it, that we have the green part is the reduction of employees, which is a big negative, almost minus 3% in gross value added. But you see also the impact, the large impact of short-time working. This is what I just mentioned, this German specialty. And then we have also a significant drop in productivity by working hour. This is what we can see from the official statistics. We expect that this will be improving. This drop in productivity by working hour reflects that it took a while until people in home office and people in production switch to digital technologies and improve their communication and digital productivity. So that's an impact here. So we expect that this is a learning impact, and hourly productivity will increase again over the next quarters. If you look here at this is a summary. Oh, sorry. This is a summary of what I just said. So we expect GDP to decline by minus 6.7% in 2020. Next year, the growth rate will be about 4.5% for the German economy. Yeah, so that's here the interesting part. If you look at the working time, you see that the working time by employees was reduced, but also the volume of work was significantly reduced in this year, which will again pick up over the course of next year. This colorful slide shows you the different components of the German economic recovery plan. This is just the national economic recovery plan. It is complementary, or the complementary element to it will be the European economic recovery plan, in which also Germany will participate to some small extent. The largest impact, or the largest component of the economic recovery plan, are a reduction in taxes. This is mostly a reduction of value-added tax by 3%, from 19% VAT to 16%. This tax reduction will be in place, or is in place from until end of year, and will be in place for about 6 months. So this is a short-term measure which has an impact of about 30 billion euros. This is the government tries to stimulate consumption now during the crisis, so that high value items are also still bought by consumers and others. The other part here, the other large part, are subsidies. These are mostly the subsidies for the short-time workers, which are also funded by the government budget and implemented through the State Employment Agency. Yeah, the other components are of minor importance. Some of them, like government consumption and current transfers, are contributing partially to it. And there's some gross fixed investment in assets. This is mostly government participation in companies like Deutsche Lufthansa, etc., where government is injecting capital to let's say, to save the major airline operator in Germany from bankruptcy. We will see that the tax subsidies, or the stimulus from tax reduction, will decline, and then in 2022 it will turn negative, which means simply the taxes will be increased again, and the tax collection will be used to finance the expenditures of the government to a larger extent. However, we see also that the subsidies, again, mostly short worker subsidies, will remain in place in 2021. And then they will bottom out until the end of 2025, but will be still significant. The simulation of this economic recovery plan in our macroeconometric model shows that without this recovery plan, the decline in GDP would be 1.3% stronger. So that is a significant impact. However, it's also a huge amount of stimulus injected into the economy. If you look at the government revenue and government expenditure ratios, here you see on the left side of the slide, on the left-hand scale, the tax and social security contributions as percent of nominal GDP. So tax collection, that's over the last years, and then the government revenue is the green line. You see the drop after the financial crisis in 2009, and then a steady increase to very high levels, and now a small drop, but the projection is that government revenue will increase again in 2021, 2022. On the right side of the screen, you see the government expenditure by different categories. On the left-hand scale are interest and gross investment as percentage of nominal value of GDP. On the right-hand scale is the government expenditure ratio. The significant information here is, from my point of view, the interest expenditure. As you can see, from 2007, interest expenditure of the government declined to very low levels by 2020, and we expect it to continue to decline. This is part of the monetary policy of the European Central Bank, which has a negative lending rate at the overnight lending rate in the banking sector, which has of course also an impact on the interest rate the German government has to pay. And then of course Germany is also something like a safe haven or stable in a stable financial situation. On my last slide, you see the net lending, net borrowing of the government over the last years. We saw in 2007 we had a proficit, so which then turned into a negative position in 2009 with the financial crisis of 2009. And 2009, 10, and 11, the German government borrowed about 213 billion euros on the capital market. And then it took almost 8 years from 2012 to 2018 to repay this and to run proficits over the years. And now the stimulus package in 2020 has already a magnitude of the entire volume of the fiscal stimulus package of the previous crisis. And this will continue next year and then also in 2022. So this is in a nutshell what is the situation on the ground in Germany. We expect that by end of year the deficit to GDP ratio will be around 80% of GDP, so still in line with still above the Maastricht criteria, but not comparable to the situation in the United States, Japan, or other countries. So thank you very much, and I'm open to receive your questions afterwards.
Dr. Hendrik, thank you very much for a very comprehensive presentation. In my opinion, the case or the example of Germany recovery plan could be a quite interesting topic to discuss about. The next speaker is Mr. Klep. He is from Belgium. With this country, we have a very positive trade turnover balance sheets. For example, combining 2019 to 2018, the turnover increased by 41%, which shows that the further steps taken by the governments could, get back to the previous years of level of turnover. And Mr. Peter Klep is a Brussels-based policy analyst dealing with EU affairs, Brexit, Eurozone. He is also director of Brussels Liberty Network, also director of monthly gathering of 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 networ
going to be a problem when interest rates are no longer low. Now, does the ECB have full control over interest rates? No, it does not. Interest rates are determined in a global environment. If we would see stress on the dollar, for example, it may be harder for the ECB to keep interest rates low. But also inflation in the Eurozone may be a driver to make it harder for the ECB to keep interest rates low. The European Central Bank only controls how much money it injects into the economy. It cannot control to what extent people still trust the currency issued by the ECB. Now, imagine if prices go up, then many people that at the moment are not necessarily panicking or are all relaxed about the situation, they will have an incentive to also exchange their euros into hard assets, which will, of course, in turn put higher pressure on prices. So it's very dangerous to think that inflation can be controlled at a certain level. From a certain level, it goes up exponentially, and things can get out of control very quickly. At the moment, there's no risk to that because we have something called disinflation because of all the economic misery. Prices, salaries are basically are decreasing. So when the ECB prints a lot of money and you have stable prices, it basically means that the prices that there is a price effect of all the money printing, but that prices would have gone even lower without the ECB printing all that money. A lot of the money printed by the ECB is sticking around in the banking system. We don't have a lot of what is called velocity of money at the moment because banks simply do not find useful projects to invest in. Now, there is an idea which I predict will unfortunately be implemented at some point when people are really desperate, and that is helicopter money. It means that the ECB would no longer print money and lend it to banks. It would print money and lend it directly to citizens. And then, of course, there's a much higher chance that the money would be used, and there's a much higher chance that you would see inflation going up. The ECB is now talking about average inflation measuring. This means that it no longer would try to limit inflation at 2% per year, but that it would look at how high inflation has been in previous years. For example, if inflation is 5%, the ECB would say, oh, it's not a problem because in the last 4 years, inflation has been close to zero, which is the case at the moment, at least official CPI statistics. They exclude real estate, they exclude stocks. So I don't think the official CPI statistics paint an accurate picture of the devaluation, the depreciation of money as a result of monetary activism. Now, long story short, what happens if interest rates go up in the Eurozone? You don't have to be an expert to know that many governments in the Eurozone would have trouble to borrow, would have trouble to refinance their debt because governments in the Eurozone do not pay back their debts. They issue a new loan to pay back old loans. And this can quickly spiral out of control. Not that quickly, because governments like Italy, like Belgium, have taken precautions. They have borrowed on very long periods of time. But still, I think in a period of 1 to 2 years, some of these countries would be very close to default. And then the question will come to Germany, to the Netherlands, to Northern Eurozone countries. Are you happy to help them with even more fiscal transfers? Are you happy to allow the ECB to print even more money? And I'm sure they will. I'm sure they will want to keep the whole thing stable, but at some point, they will no longer be allowed by citizens. Taxpayers will revolt at some point. Also, Northern European countries will ask that there will be conditions attached to bailouts for Southern European countries, which will be opposed in Southern European countries. So those who will have to pay will not be happy. Those who will have to accept the conditions linked to the payments will not be happy. And In such a scenario, it is not excluded that politicians decide to go back in quite a panicky mood to what they know, which is national currencies. As I mentioned, this would make it much harder for certain governments in Europe to refinance their debt. It would lead to defaults, perhaps defaults through major monetary activism in the new printed currencies, but this would have a global effect. It would not just be limited to the Eurozone. And I think all of that may well be a result of the enormous economic damage that has been caused by COVID.
Thank you, Peter. Very interesting point of view. I think in the discussions we're going to touch upon the issues that you have raised. I think it's like, quite critical one, and everyone has discussing as long as the governments are supporting their economies by, as you say, the printing out the money from the central banks. But in my, memory comes out the words of some of the great prime ministers of United Kingdom who said that there is no such thing as public money, only for the taxpayers' money. So that is a thing that everyone should remember. Anyway, as this webinar is dedicated for economy, the next speakers will explain to us the energy markets globally. And the next speaker is from France, Mr. Jean-Pierre Cordier from France, and he's going to say about global energy market outlook, post-COVID situation, climate change, energy transition, the place of fossils and fuels, and the renewable energies at the horizon 2015. And about Mr. Cordier, I can say that he spent a lot of time in the oil industry and the geophysics. In 1972, occupied various positions in exploration production in France, Canada, Angola, and he spent around 12 years at Total, also as vice president of that company for more than 5 years. And now he's the president of the International Commission called Société d'Encouragement pour l'Industrie Nationale. Sorry for my French, but I think my pronunciation was pretty understandable. Mr. Cordier, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Norbert, and thank you for the invitation. And hello to everybody. I'm not an economist. I am most an engineer, so I will talk more as an engineer than as an economist. So I will talk about the energy situation of today and try to give some information about what it could be in the future. Today, a little bit more than 80% of the global primary energy supply is from fossil fuels, coal, oil, and gas. Fossil origin means that to produce energy by combustion, we emit CO2 and other greenhouse gases, and so it is contributing to the global warming. You all know that. On top of that, 2020, this year, we are experiencing the COVID crisis, which is severely, as you have well shown, damaging the economic life of the world. For example, I recall something which was really incredible. The price of the oil became negative last April in the United States, which was something you could not imagine. So this is a problem that I hope in 2 or 3 years will be over. Now let's address the climate change, which was the biggest problem before the COVID. The climate change is linked to the rapid increase of the world population and its use of energy. The global population today, we are around 7.8 billion people and will be around 10 billion people on Earth in 2050, which leads to an increase of energy demand estimated to about 50% compared to today. And this increase will be mainly in emerging countries. So what is the situation? The energy demand will be growing rapidly and at the same time reducing CO2 emission linked to the human activity and contributing to climate warming will be a priority. So this situation is clearly conflictual. But the structure of energy demand is bound to change over time with the decline of fossil fuels and increasing share of renewable energies. So a small digression. Why such a dominance of fossil fuels today? Because they have tremendous qualities, plentiful resources, very high energy content in reduced volume, fairly cheap, easy to carry, which means that they are really difficult to replace, particularly in the transportation sector. But of course, they have a major fault, which is the emission of greenhouse gases, which contributes, as you know, to the warming of the planet. So what could be the solution to this problem? The first one is fairly obvious. This is energy efficiency and energy conservation. What is energy efficiency? It is using less energy to provide the same service. For example, a better isolation of buildings will need less energy. Energy conservation is the prevention of it is the prevention of the wasteful use of energy. Example, you turn off the light when you leave a room. So those are the most simple, fastest, and cleanest ways to face the increasing demand of energy and to decrease energy consumption. It is interesting to note that 9 out of 10 voluntary contribution announced by the 195 states which signed the Paris Agreement refer to energy efficiency. So this is something we don't talk too much about, but this is something which is really important. But of course, this implies a change in people's behavior and way of life. The second solution, also fairly obvious, is to replace the fossil sources of energies by other sources which are well known. There is first the nuclear, but you know that the Fukushima effect is slowing down. Now nuclear energy, not stopping, but slowing down. Solar, wind, hydro, geothermal, marine energy, and so on and so on. This movement of replacing is underway, but it is slow because all the qualities of the fossil fuels that I mentioned, and also but because those new techniques are fairly expensive and not yet suitable for particular uses as, for example, air transportation. Moreover, the question of intermittency of those sources and the question of the necessity of power storage has not been resolved so far. So, you know, the situation is in evolution, but in full swing. And what is really interesting is to note that today there is a lot of money invested into those new technologies, new energies. And the financial world today is convinced that clean energy is a smart investment. Let's have a look briefly on the oil and gas industry. Because, of course, Kazakhstan is a big producer of oil. And to address this, question, we have to talk about the global carbon budget. What is the global carbon budget? This is the total amount of carbon in the Earth's atmosphere, seas and land. Okay. To make it short, limiting global warming requires staying in the limit of carbon content in the atmosphere. You can understand that. And for an increase of temperature limited to 1.5 2 degrees, this limit is estimated to 3,000 gigatons of CO2. This is the limit. Anthropogenic, which means emission made by the man, CO2 emission since the pre-industrial period are estimated to approximately 2,200 gigatons of CO2. What does it mean? It means that the associated remaining CO2 budget is around 800 gigatons of CO2. That means that starting from today, we cannot emit more than 800 gigatons of CO2 in the atmosphere. And at the current use of fossil fuels, we will reach this emission in 25 to 30 years. So this is, what are the consequences? The reserves of oil are estimated to 40, 50 years. Reserves of gas estimated to 50, 70 years. Or we cannot burn all those resources. In this scenario, that means, and this is important for Kazakhstan and for all the oil-producing countries, that an important quantity of already well-known and defined resources will not be produced or developed. Only the resources with the lowest production, development, and or discovery cost will be eligible to supply energy. And I would say that this is fairly new because it was a hypothesis, but now in the oil industry, I'm coming from the oil industry, we believe that this is true and this will be true. Donc, what are the consequences? Number one, the probability is that oil companies will produce, as a matter of priority, cheapest reserves and the easiest to develop. Consequence number two, oil and gas company will develop gas as a priority. Why? Because gas combustion is emitting 2 times less of CO2 than coal for the same energy produced. Consequence number three, big oil companies in Europe and in USA, I would say all the big oil companies are reviewing their strategy and investing more and more in power generation, transmission and distribution. For example, Total, coming from this company, has committed to carbon neutrality in 2050 and aims to install a capacity of 25 gigawatts of renewable power by 2025, 5 years from now. And I recall that this is equivalent to about 20 nuclear reactors. Okay, so what are the scenarios for the future? There are many different scenarios and they are all different. They come from agencies, from governments, from companies, but all those scenarios, they say that fossil fuel will be still important, the most important source of energy in the coming years until, let's say, 2050. So that means that we will still emit a lot of CO2. And so this shows the necessity of what we call carbon capture and storage. CCS, which means that we can capture the CO2 emitted by fossil fuels and inject this CO2 into the ground, okay? And this is fast developing. And today, there are only 21 carbon capture facilities in activities in the world. There are about 30 projects, but for a total of 37 billion of US dollars. So that's a lot. And of course, if we want companies and industry to have recourse to the CCS, we have to put a tax on the CO2 emissions. And this is a big problem. It is a political problem. It is a technical problem. And it is currently discussed everywhere in the world. But we don't know exactly what will come out of that. Okay, this was a little bit short. I tried to make a large outlook of the question, and of course I am ready to answer, to try to answer your questions, if any. Thank you very much.
Monsieur Cordier?
Yeah.
Very comprehensive, and I would like to just say that, you know, every economy in the world requires energy. So energy, development of energy sector, it should be, you know, like closely touched upon. Well, let's discuss it in the following up session. And the next speaker is Mr. Paolo Sarbello. He is from Italy, and I would like to inform you that the turnover between Kazakhstan and Italy is around $7 billion, and this is the 16% of in total volume. The higher only the Russia and China, and only from Italy in the energy sector we have 164 companies working in Kazakhstan. Mr. Sarbello is a PhD candidate at the University of Glasgow, research fellow at the C.A. Foscari University of Venice, member of the executive committee at the Observatory on the Caucasus and Central Asia, with a speech between low oil prices and the pandemic, Kazakhstan's road to economic recovery. Mr. Sarbello, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nurbek. Thank you for everybody else who's in this webinar. Do you have my slides? Because if you can put them on.
We have.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, I think they tie up pretty well with the previous speeches. I must say that I'm from Italy, but my expertise is mostly concentrated in Kazakhstan, where I've been living for the previous 3 years, and that's why my presentation will focus mostly on Kazakhstan. And I think it also links up back to the first presentation that Kwanish gave us at the beginning with the measures to come out of the crisis, let's say. So in the next slide, I show basically just the oil price slump in 2020 and how the fall in oil prices was quite sharp, and it was basically a combination of factors, which many people have called double whammy. And many people have said that these are lower for longer oil price years. So the oil price will stay at about $40 to $50 for the coming future. And that is basically an optimistic scenario at this point. In the next slide, I would like to explain more this double whammy that has hit most oil-producing countries, but also Kazakhstan. First of all, the price dispute between Russia and Saudi Arabia, which climaxed at the beginning of March. And then the spread of COVID-19 and the fall in demand of oil across the globe, especially from China. but then also from Europe, it had a negative effect on oil exporting countries. Demand is expected to fall by 9.3 million barrels of oil per day in 2020 compared to last year, which is really it's going to be really it's going to affect the economies of oil producing countries. Lower oil prices also meant and an oversupply of oil after the price dispute between Russia and Saudi Arabia meant that oil became untradeable basically, and tankers filled with oil were not docking into the ports and not selling their oil because, as we heard before, we had periods of very low or even negative oil prices, and so it was unprofitable to trade it. Pipeline oils also, oil trade was also affected, and specifically in the case of Kazakhstan, the two main pipelines going to the west, the Caspian Pipeline Consortium, and the one going to the east to China, were affected by lower demand both in China and globally. And falling profits from the side of producing companies and state-owned enterprises working on the oil sector also meant falling tax revenues. The biggest tax contributors in Kazakhstan, for example, are oil and gas companies. And if they don't make enough profits, they will probably pay less in taxes in the future years. Another thing is that many countries, including Kazakhstan, have been unable to fully assist the growing unemployment. As we even saw it in Germany in the slides before, but Kazakhstan, as according to the data, has been affected even more strongly. Also because the unemployment problems had started before this crisis. One of the last protests before the crisis for about unemployment and underemployment in the Mangistau region was in February 2020, for example. And this basically explains how it's also a trend of both endemic crisis and internal problems that has been affected by this double whammy of oil price slump and COVID. In the next slide, I would like to highlight the fact that we all know that the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, borders are closed and travel is restricted, but still, as I try to tell in this presentation, we haven't done away with the oil economy. The ripple effect that we've seen also explained in the previous presentations was that from big to small, the crisis has affected several companies, and also infrastructure projects that have been postponed, sovereign wealth funds that have eroded their reserves, and small and medium enterprises have been suffering, which also has had a negative effect on employment. And but to bring in examples from Kazakhstan, the pandemic was a major opportunity for transnational corporations, for example, to engage in social responsibility. There were private companies in the Atirau and Mangistau regions that bought medical equipment, built hospital facilities, delivered food supplies, and these charitable actions were also instrumental for these companies to improve their own workers' conditions, to ensure the healthy return of their workers. But we've seen that basically this meant that, as experts said a few days ago at the Kyoge conference, that transnational corporations fulfill the role of the state, which again, it becomes problematic because it's voluntary. So it's not really directed to the well-being of everybody, but it's mostly directed to the recovery of the bottom line of the companies and to the resumption of profitability. But because the Kazakhstan continues to be reliant on oil, as long as oil dependency persists, Kazakhstan will continue to be just one oil price slump away from another economic downturn, which is not a good position to be in terms of the economic stability of the country. In the next slide, I would like to say more about the fact that Kazakhstan's compliance with the OPEC plus supply cuts was not really dependent on the requests from OPEC plus, but mostly had to do with internal oil production trends. So before 2019, Kazakhstan was not compliant with OPEC price cuts because the Kashagan offshore project started. Now old and the least profitable oil projects have become less, have produced less, and so now we can see a cut in oil production. But that I don't think has a lot to do with the requests from the OPEC plus organization. In addition, we have to make sure to look deeply into the eroding reserves, both of the sovereign wealth fund, but also in the oil reserves. Kazakhstan has very important and very promising oil fields across the country, but also very old and declining oil fields across the region. The Samruk-Kazyna Wealth Fund has promised to transfer money to the state budget and to make up for these year's losses. But this could also dent the sustainability of the sovereign wealth fund, which could be problematic again for the future. But again, the sovereign wealth fund is built for these rainy days, so we need to expect it to step up in these periods. Also, the government budgeted about between $20 and $30 oil price per barrel for this year. So it's trying to be ready for an economic downturn. But yet again, I want to stress that the Kazakhstan oil economy hasn't really changed. And this also has to do with the fact that supporting the jobs means that, or the lack of jobs has had another effect on the state budget. There was a program to support people who lost their jobs with $100 check every month. But this also will now, this was not enough, of course, and so this had another effect, which was putting pressure on banks, and so it's going to be financially also, it's going to be a very difficult way back because of the effect on the financial liquidity of local banks. I would like to also say that as one of the last sort of sentences in the negative side of things, that we, especially as foreign observers, have not, in the previous slide, sorry, that we have not seen sort of the fulfilling of the promise of the Astana Expo, which had the slogan "Energy of the Future." It was talking about renewable energy, digitalization, and despite some progress, we haven't seen a significant turn, renewable energy sources have not yet become a significant part of Kazakhstan's energy mix. And that, again, the fact that Kazakhstan is an oil economy means that GDP growth will slow down at every oil price slump. In the next slide, again, like experts have said that without fundamental changes, it will be hard for oil and gas to go back to earlier profitability, both globally but also in Kazakhstan. And so, as President Tokayev mentioned in his latest address to the nation, there needs to be a green growth plan, which I argue should also be focused on humans rather than profitability, because as we mentioned before, fossil fuels are cheap, fossil fuels are easy to find, but they also contribute to climate change. They also contribute to pollution. They're not sustainable because they produce rents that are not dynamic. So I would stress that from Tokayev's address to the nation. Another of the solutions that I see necessary and also quite achievable is to build a more predictable system of rule of law that will bolster trust from foreign investors. In addition, I would like also to highlight how in line my analysis is with the one from Kwanish, talking about local development in the regions of Kazakhstan. It's a vast territory that cannot be reduced to just the cities of Almaty and Nur-Sultan. Every region has its own specificities and could have enormous potential for growth. And also, I would like to also stress the fact that an enhanced cooperation with Kazakhstan's neighbors will sink Central Asian economies and hopefully ensure beneficial regional cooperation among them. And I hope that this was exhaustive enough, but if there's any more questions, I'd be happy to answer. Thank you.
Much, Paolo. Very interesting presentation. As long as you have touched upon the Expo 2017, this is, very close to my heart, as I spent over there like 4 years since 2014, encouraging the countries to participate. And as I told, all the countries, 115 countries participate in our Expo. This is not just kind of investment projects or short-term projects. This is long-term projects. And if you have a look at the previous Expos, this is not just the government investing money in the kind of one thing. This is, multifunctional abroad to the economy, to the culture, etc. And this is not the, receiving the impact just afterwards. It's going to take, 40 or 50 years. It's just, the comments to your speech about Expo 2017, as I, just hear. Lately, almost no one talks about Expo 2017, as no one talks about the Shanghai or Milano. So, ladies and gentlemen, my gratefulness for all of you that gave the speeches. Quite interesting, comprehensive. We touched upon the fiscal policies, economy, finances, energy markets, and the rest. Also, let me introduce to you our experts from the Economic Research Institute, Ms. Shulpan and Mr. Aydin, Ms. Madina, Ms. Nauraz, Mr. Alibek. The floor will be given to you if you have any questions. Before that, let me just, briefly tell to you that the current crisis, let's hope that this is the last big crisis that happened to the world, as called COVID-19, impacted the global economy quite heavily. And each country, each institutions or organizations are looking for, the solutions that would be quite effective and, stable in terms of, not injecting more resources and receiving, less impact on different sectors of economy. But, each country has its own way, of course. And today we had the pleasure of listening to Mr. Panish, who told us about the steps and measures that they're taking by Kazakhstan and our government, including our president and the Yelbasa, that are, paying quite high attention to this very sensitive issue that are facing by the world. And I have also one thing to mention about it is the address of our president that has been made on 2nd of September, where he touched upon all the measures or steps that should be taken. And the first in the list is the human. So the population, the people of Kazakhstan are the first. So everything the government does is for the people. And here, as the Institute of Economic Research, and also as you are representing those institutions, we are all looking for the solutions that would help not the multinational companies, but for the humans, for the people. I have a very, quite general question. We have listened today to several presentations with the some positive impacts or positive data that we're receiving after, the peaks of the pandemic, quite started in autumn. But many experts today are speaking about the second wave that would be perhaps harder than the first one, and it could gradually impact on the economy. So this is a general question, maybe some of you who might be interested in answering. What would be the worst scenario of this recession? For example, in inflation, in terms of inflation, in terms of, job losses, in terms of, on housekeeping. Any thoughts that I'm not telling about the short term, like end of the year, but as Professor Abid Boyle said that, we have to get used to live with the pandemic, which means that, it could take around a year or more. That it means that the government should, inject more resources, take more measures or steps that could finally affect the income of the people. So do you think the hard times are coming up, or the global efforts should be enough in order to avoid the worst scenario?
Well, as for me, Norbert, I would say some, and definitely I would like to underline some positive and non-other pessimistic point of view related to COVID-19 pandemic in terms of social, definitely social and everyday life of people. This pandemic has led many people to live more with essential. With many of us, we have seen that, and we have to become aware of ourselves and others. The mistrust in terms of health condition of others leads also towards solidarity. The recognition of the work of the medical staff has also has to be really underlined. This also related to the pandemic. And what we can also say, and we have to mention that the drastic increase of green mobility has not much more developed. The example of city of Paris is very accurate, for example. All the city, the life of the city itself changed a lot. If you come, you can see all the streets of Paris that are full of now many people make mobility either by bicycle or by other means of transportation, more or less with electric. And in fact, that's also brought a kind of development of internal tourism. You can say that with the impossibility to travel abroad leads to travel in its country and discover, knowing more its country is also part of the consequences of this pandemic. Of course, now regarding the second pandemic, if it will occur, that many countries are prepared for that. We have to, as we said previously, to be used to this condition of life, and to to be adapt to the situation as much as it can be possible, and but of course taking all distance and all precaution in the meanwhile the vaccine will be developed. That's what I can say. Maybe some other colleagues will also react regarding to this point. I will be happy to listen them.
Well, thank you, Professor Claude. I think, everyone is talking about vaccine, and almost all of the countries are developing towards, succession of the vaccine. Well, let's have a look what will be happening in next few months. Professor Hendrik, Germany is, normally leading country in terms of economic development. For example, not just locally in the Eurozone or European Union, but globally playing a great role. And you have shown us today certain, measures, steps that has been taken, and the GDP growth is being foreseen for the positive. Job losses has been decreased. Do you think that the steps that taken by the German government is efficient?
Well, in terms of efficiency, it's, I think, far too early to make a judgment. The common understanding is, the common sense in Germany is that we are so far getting through quite okay through this crisis in terms of health issues, but also in economic terms. This German specialty of short worker funding by the taxpayer through the Federal Employment Agency is regarded as a very successful tool to avoid significant drops or to significant increases in unemployment. So this preserves companies, but there's of course also a trade-off on the other hand, because you also somehow have the effect that companies which were already not productive before the crisis are now using this instrument for restructuring. So that's a discussion which is ongoing now in Germany. The other issue is that, of course, this COVID pandemic has shown the structural weaknesses of all economies affected. This is particularly true for Kazakhstan, with its heavy dependence on fossil fuel exports. But it has shown also the structural weaknesses in Germany or other European economies. And in Germany, the biggest issue on the discussion now in terms of structural change is the restructuring of the German automobile industry. So now the push is towards electric cars and to hybrid models to develop also or put more emphasis on hydrogen as a means of transportation. So if Germany can or the German companies can manage this transition away from fossil combustion engines towards alternative modes of transportation, then this will be probably a significant result of this crisis, which has accelerated this structural change in a much deeper sense. The other issue is that we all understood now that we need a certain deglobalization in some aspects. As at the beginning of the pandemic, we all realized that in the health industry, we were dependent on one or two suppliers globally on some critical equipment like masks and medical treatments. So there will be probably now another evaluation of global supply chains that you will figure in also the costs or the associated with the risk that the supply chain will be interrupted. So this needs a new approach to business. And then let's put it that way. Germany has learned a lot from the impact of the financial crisis in 2009. It was one of the few countries which reduced its public debt below the Maastricht criteria before the COVID-19 crisis impacted again. And there is a common understanding in German policy among German policymakers that this debt levels will be reduced again to more sustainable levels according to the Maastricht criteria, so something in the range of 60% of GDP. This will be not be pursued this or next year, but starting from 2022 onwards, this will be a priority agenda for the German government. This, of course, will, if this is implemented, widen the divide between Northern European countries in the Eurozone and Southern European countries. Italy is in particular affected from the corona pandemic, but also from enormous levels of government debt. And Italy needs to invest a lot into its economy as it is losing also by value added, and it has a very low level of digitalization and digital services compared to other industries. So therefore, we need to put more emphasis on the recovery plan of the European Union, which will be done on a project base and which has a significant investment component and a clear focus also on green investment. As we talked already today on energy and climate change, this is another issue which needs to be addressed, and there is a common sense in the European Union that this recovery needs to be green. So that we do not invest into assets which are becoming obsolete in a medium term because of climate change issues. So we do not invest in coal-fired power plants. We do not invest into diesel or the gasoline automobiles. So that's an important lesson here. And this is something what Kazakhstan could also now somehow learn from or take as an issue or an insight from European and German recovery issues. Put now real emphasis on all the promises, the green economy concept, the Expo and so on made in the past, that Kazakhstan will turn into a green bridge. So far, not much has happened, and the energy efficiency of the Kazakh economy is still among the top 5 worst energy efficient countries in the world. And so far, the government has also not taken any recovery measures to respond to Corona crisis. So far, everything is only limited to emergency relief to the population, which is keeping people fed and that they can pay for their bills. But this is not an economic stimulus package. So what I would urge you is also to continue working, especially as ERI, on ideas how to stimulate the economy of Kazakhstan again, not only focusing or praying for recovery of global oil prices on the markets. So that's maybe an important issue here. Thank you.
Dr. Hendrik, thank you very much. With all due respect, I believe that you might have lack of information about the measures or steps that have been taken by the government of Kazakhstan towards economy recovery. But we gladly share it with you, or Mr. Kwanish will, share this information to you, and mainly, and also about the depending on oil prices. For the last 15 years, we have started the policy towards economy diversification. And in any ways, we have to keep in mind that the gaining process of independence happened only in 1991. And since then, when the economy was collapsed, I could say that, on the every level, no production, nothing, no labor, no job opportunities, etc. And after 30 years, where we are and where we can go, this is something that we are glad to discuss with you or exchange the views. And of course, the pandemic 19 has called upon the need of learning of different countries that are taking measures or steps towards the economic recovery. So we are now, as the institute, studying it where it could be applied over here or not, and to find out the forecasting process as well. So that's why, the main idea of this webinar is to discuss and to see what would be the, best scenarios to go forward. And also, as our first president said, let me quote him, every crisis is the opportunity for economy, as you, Mr. Hendrik, indicated, for structural reforms, to see the errors of the economy, where the lacks of the economy, where we should more attention in order to develop more, effectively. So, sorry, this is going kind of, moderator asking questions only. Maybe some experts might have some or opinion.
Yes, actually. Yeah. My name is Nauris. I am a senior expert of Economic Research Institute. I do have two questions to Dr. Lars Hendricks. First question is, when you were talking about short-time workers, which is in your forecasting was declined in after the third quarter. What was why this was the reason of this decline? It's because people lost their jobs, or was governments stop support them? And the second question, I have read that after the world crisis 2009, the German business community supported the government by raising taxes. In the reality of the pandemic, do you think the business community will agree to repeat this experience? And how do you think the German government is fighting the pandemic alone, or government or together with the business community?
Okay, to your first question, the number of short-term workers is declining because we have an increased demand for production. So the automobile exports, especially to China, picked up again. So that's the significant impact here on this instrument. It's not so much for job losses. The guarantee for short-term workers is extended until 2021, end of 2021. So therefore, the people will not directly go from short-term work into unemployment. Unemployment is taking place in sectors where you cannot apply for short-term work, or where the company is going bankrupt anyway. So that's also happening, continue to happen. The other question on the consolidation of the budget. There were no large tax increases after the financial crisis 2009. These tax increases happened before. When value-added tax was increased by 3 percentage points in 2006 or so, or 2006, yes. So that's partially answering your question. The other one is German businesses ready to consolidate the budget? The most important source of government revenue is value-added tax. So as value-added tax will be increased again to 19% by end of this, or by start of next year, the tax gap will be narrowing. And then, of course, there is a common understanding that this will not be enough to balance the budget and to reduce government debt. So there will be a discussion on tax increases. And this is across all political parties now already going on. I don't see that there is a significant opposition of German business. I mean, that's something what is widely accepted, that this should be the case. But anyhow, you should know that German business is not so heavily concentrated like in Kazakhstan. We have 96% of all German businesses are SMEs, and the large corporates are only a small fraction. So therefore, the tax issue is not so much connected to resistance and opposition and so on. So there's a common understanding that this is necessary to be implemented. Thank you.
It's not opposing, new taxes or tax raises.
It's not about new taxes. It's about using existing taxes. So it's not about inventing something completely new. So it's just using what is already there, and there will be an increase in, I don't know, value-added tax or whatever. So but there is a common understanding that we need to go through a budget consolidation. It's different to other countries.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Hendrik. And Mr. Kwanish would like to comment.
Actually, I don't have a comment, but I would like to ask a question. I have actually two questions. First one to Mr. Lars Hendrik. The second one is Paul Saldella. First one is about Lars. You have talked about the movement to the new alternative energy for the automobiles, for example, giving up the diesel and gas and moving to the other source of energy, for example. But given the current structure of the energy production, where the serious share is taking the traditional fossil fuel, will not it put a pressure to the other sectors, for the energy sector, if the producers like BMW, Mercedes move forward to the production of the other cars, electric cars? Will it put a pressure to the electric companies, for example? They will produce more electricity using gas, for example, and other sources. I know that in Germany, there is a leader in using alternative energy, but in the other part of the world, it's not the same as in Germany. So how it can work, for example, globally. And the second question to Mr. Paolo Sorbella, as Italy is taking the huge part in my heart because I spent 2 beautiful years there studying at Bocconi University. And I would like to ask about the Italian situation here according to the current crisis. And I know that there is a very big problems with the deficit and the debt. How the Italian government is taking steps to the recovery process of Italy, and do they have the strict plan of taking action on the toward the recovery? Thank you very much. So,
yeah, you're asking about the energy transition. This is an important element of any initiatives and efforts to combat climate change. You may know that already 50% of German energy or power generated in the electricity sector is from renewable sources. And there are already increasing periods where we have renewables in the market. There will be there will be a much further increase in renewables in Germany. The issue here is not so much that there is a shortage of electricity in European Union. There is no shortage. The issue, what was raised already here, is about storage of electricity, where different models are developed, and of course, electric vehicles will be a significant source of storage of energy. You should see that every battery of a car is a storage point for electricity generated. So therefore, yes, there will be a significant increase in electric transportation, and this will not put a significant stress on the German energy system. And with regards to other countries, I think it will be unavoidable for Kazakhstan also to increase its power generated from renewables. The current level of 3% is extremely low. You are not very ambitious in this respect, and the next plans for increasing renewables in Kazakhstan are mostly focusing on hydropower, which is a little bit puzzling for me, because Kazakhstan is also affected by climate change in a way that precipitation patterns will change, while solar and wind is not really explored in depth. So therefore, you should become more ambitious. So maybe that's the issue here. And please keep in mind that it's not only European Union which wants to be climate neutral by 2050. It's also China moving that way. It was announced in the United Nations by the Chinese president that China will be at the level of net zero emissions by 2060, which is 10 years later after the European Union. But these are movements which are going on, and therefore, yes, Kazakhstan needs to address this issue and quite swiftly, and the time is now. I agree with Mr. Cordier that certainly technologies connected to CCS would be helpful in this energy and climate transition as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you for your question, Quanish. I must say that unfortunately I have not spent 2 years in Italy in a very, very long time.
Sure.
I spent my last 3 in Kazakhstan, so happily so. But from what I read in the news, on the one hand, there's political instability because the majority in the government is more and more uncertain, and there could be movements of ministries, and the political forces could shuffle around in the coming months. At the same time, though, there's a stability in the government itself, in its response to the virus, which could be good. Of course, though, the goalposts are moving all the time because now we have the second wave in Italy and in specific regions, especially. So that's problematic and could lead to a sort of center periphery debate and clash of policies. So that could be problematic from that point of view. There will be an enormous amount of money that will need to be pumped back into the economy to basically stimulate growth again, because both businesses but also the livelihood of people have been affected in a very serious way in Italy. So I expect that one way or the other, but again, I'm not an expert, but at the same time, every time I read the papers, Italy sends out mixed messages about what its government is doing. So I expect some sort of stimulus package to appear.
Thank you, Paolo. I see the Shulpan would like to make a comment.
Yes, good afternoon, dear colleagues. My name is Shulpan Kaimoldina. I'm expert at the Economic Research Institute. And first of all, I would like to thank all the speakers with your great presentations and for your time and interest in this event. And secondly, I have some remarks. So based on the accumulated experience over the past 15-20 years, the forecast of the situation in the energy sector in most cases is not confirmed. So economic trends are determined by geopolitical, military, social, economic, transport, logistics, and financial factors. And there are so many obvious and hidden, as well as external and internal factors that can affect the Kazakhstan's economy. In Kazakhstan's economic situation is not determined only by oil price situation, but also by a number of other factors such as banking and financial economic situation in Russia and partner countries, as well as the situation on the world stock markets. There may be one large-scale factor of several minor factors that can shape the economy in our country. In this case, it's more appropriate to talk about the ability to meet changes and make decisions in the course of the current economic situation. So I mean that forecasting needs to be done, but making long-term forecasts in the modern world is probably somehow pointless. The situation is with COVID-19, with various social, military, political conflicts, the situation with the world financial markets showed that the world is so much globalized and can change overnight, despite any predicted or planned scenarios. And it's more expedient to proceed from short-term or medium-term forecast the economic situation that you own And I mean, to be able to manage this process urgently, so-called the effective change management, which is a current challenge for modern economies and government agencies. Thank you.
Thank you, Shulpan. Thank you very much, Shulpan. Very comprehensive, interesting. Anyone else? While you are thinking, maybe I will
May I
comment
ask
on
a question?
Yes, Aydin, please.
Yes, it's Aydin. My name is Aydin. Hi to all. Thank you for your valuable presentation and speeches. I want to ask the general question to all speakers. And my question relates to my worries about the future, and it's related to climate change. As you know, maybe one of the consequences of climate change is the change of borders of climatic zones. With this change, the diseases from traditional places move to the new ones where they can mutate and become globally spread. So how do you think, what is the level of this risk that new global viruses will appear in this decade? And should we consider measures to prevent this issue right now, or we can wait when economics recover from COVID and then react?
Mr. Cordier, perhaps you could respond.
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not an expert in that. First, I don't know whether the COVID virus is linked to climate change, you know. I'm not sure of that. And because in the past, in the last centuries, we had already some virus and some disease spreading generally between Asia and Europe. And so I think it is historical, you know, and I think we are once again in this situation. I'm not so sure it is linked to climate change. And, but I don't know if it is really difficult to prevent such a disease, because when you look at the possibility of transportation we have now, I don't really believe in measures who would prevent people from traveling. You know, it's so easy and it is so cheap now that unfortunately, I think that when there is such a pandemia, it will be a global one really fast. I don't know whether I really answered your question. I'm not sure, but this is my opinion about the situation.
Yes, because I've read some opinions, they linked COVID to climate change, actually. I'm not aware, maybe researchers will show maybe there is a link or not. It's just worries.
I think that nobody knows, you know. But what is true, it is that the Economic Organization of the World now makes really easy for the virus to spread all around the world really rapidly.
Yeah, and if you can listen to the experts, sometimes, you know, COVID-19 affects everything you touch upon, you know, everything is around it. Maybe sometime in the future, they would say that the space is affected by the COVID-19 as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you allow me, let me say great thanks indeed for participation and for giving your time, giving your knowledge about the measures, about the steps that are being taken towards the economic recovery. It is indeed very hard times for all of us. And this crisis should mean that only together, only alongside to each other, we can, you know, move up to the certain levels before the COVID-19. And sincerely, I believe that the outcome after the COVID-19 would be much better than some of the experts are forecasting these days. Everything has its end, and the coronavirus will end sooner or later. And these days we have to just, keep calm, if you like, and go forward. And although it is difficult, quite difficult to determine the speed and strength of the recovery, but today's webinar showed that the certain measures are being quite positively impacting the economies. And again, thank you very much indeed. And please keep safe for you, for your relatives. We'll be keep in touch. And if you need, we can send out the information that we have provided today. And with best regards, thank you very much indeed for all of you. Thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.